Hello, welcome to the Not My Plan podcast. I'm host Dave Weil, where we experience God in the unexpected. Today we have a special guest, Kate. Hello, Kate.
Hi, Dave.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
Fantastic. All right, I'm excited to get into your story and share it with the world.
Yeah, me too.
All right, Kate, start off the podcast with this question. Have you ever had anything in life not go according to plan?
Definitely.
So whenever I ask people this question, Kate, people are like, no, never. Of course, they're just being sarcastic, or they're like, yeah, every day, including today. And so the purpose of this podcast is to share, to collect stories, share stories of things that did not go according to plan, that's tied with a God story, to encourage others who have gone through something similar, maybe in the middle of it, or might in the future be going through it. So it's to share your story for God's glory. All right, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. So, Kate, tell us a little bit. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up I started off in California, went back to New York, and then at 10 came back to California. So a little back and forth across the country when I was little. Spent most of my life in California until I was an adult. Yeah, I loved it out there, but we're new transplants to Tennessee since, August, and we're loving it out here.
We do run into people almost every day, someone that's moved from California. So, you're welcome. Welcome to Tennessee.
Thank you.
Do you miss California?
No, the move was
Not even
purposeful.
not even a little bit, huh?
Not even a little bit. It's so much nicer out here. You actually get to be a part of your community. It's so friendly, so welcoming, so warming, just a completely different way of living. And, I have an 11-year-old, and that's really what I wanted for her when she's growing up. And I couldn't give it to her in California.
Understand that. All right. So, tell us a little bit about what did not go according to plan for you, Kate?
Well, it wasn't my plan to be an alcoholic, and it really wasn't my plan to find God in my life again through surrender.
Gotcha. As you share your story, we know there's a lot of people that struggle with alcohol. And again, our prayer is that sharing your story will help someone else. Okay. So tell us a little bit. How did you get started? How old were you? Just whatever you like to share, Kate.
Well, it was kind of revelational for me once I did get sober, but alcohol wasn't something that really snuck up on me. It was always something that was kind of a part of my life. Okay. Alcohol was something that it didn't sneak up on me. It was just something that's kind of always been there, a part of my life. My family were partiers. We were garage people. We hang out in the garage. They had cocktails. It was, always what the adults did. And, when I got to be a teenager, it's going out and partying on the weekends with your friends. I lived in an area where you could go out into the country and just kind of party as, high schoolers. And it was normal. It's just a part of everyday life. And it wasn't a problem until it was a problem. And the problem came quick. So it was,
So, Kate, how old were you when you had your first taste of alcohol?
and I wasn't tiny. I was probably 16. For the most part, I was a pretty conservative kid and didn't want to get in trouble. And then it was like, when everyone started experimenting in high school, I was a little late. And I started drinking and it really didn't stop from there. So I met my now ex-husband when I was 18, right after graduation, and we married 5 years later. The catalyst was, a lot of what was going on in my marriage. The nice version is that we kind of grew up, grew apart, stopped looking at life kind of the same way. And alcohol kind of became that catalyst. It was a glue and also the reason that I think my marriage ended at the end as well. We were using it as a way to hang out and have fun, but as the night would progress, it wasn't fun anymore. And it was a very volatile situation. And I left my marriage, thought it would get better, and it didn't.
So, how long were you married for?
Oh God, for 10 years almost. We were together for 15 and, kids together, kids into our 20s and almost into my 30s before we divorced. It was a kind of a rude awakening. I went from my mom's house to a relationship with him. Really hadn't ever been by myself and always, had my identity tied up either in my parents and my family or, now this man. I'm standing there with like the worst period of my life where I don't know, really who I am, what I want from my life, but I definitely know I don't want that. And it was just time to kind of, make a decision for myself. But I thought I was making good decisions and, moving on with my life, but I didn't really stop to realize or even kind of look at why this problem with alcohol started, kind of happening in my life to begin with. And, when I moved and we divorced, I was in a home by myself, and I just it got worse. I kept drinking actually more. Those problems in my life that I thought were him really were me problems. It didn't go away after the marriage. So, I was going to work and doing my thing and raising my child, but I was walking through the door and having shots before I even took my coat off at the end of the day. So it was, you know, get up, go to work, come home, get drunk, take care of my kid, repeat. And I was miserable. It was not a way that I wanted to be living, nor a example that I wanted to be making for my daughter either.
Were you drinking every day or
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty much every day. I was finishing bottles by myself. And when you're finishing something like that and you're not out socializing and it's just over a couple hour period, it snuck up on me too, where you don't realize until you're really paying attention how much you are, but it was every day. And then when it started to be in the mornings too, and not just in the evenings, that was a big wake up call for me too, because then it became my entire life was integrated with my drinking and how to get away with it and keep moving.
did you ever was there a period of time at the beginning maybe where you didn't think it was a problem? You just enjoy it and you were fine?
Yeah, for a lot of years. We became 21, we did the bar scene, we lived right down the street. All of our friends went out and it was normal. And I don't think for a long, long time that it was a problem. I was a normal drinker. I'd go out with my friends and, wasn't big drinking during the week, but when the marriage really started to deteriorate, that's when it, got to be more of a numbing situation. I could handle everything that was going on in my life and in my marriage and my home if I could numb it a little bit. And I think that was really kind of the step that I took over that line was it became a medication now for me, something to numb where I didn't want to be able to still be there. Leaving at that point wasn't really an option. Having a small child and an income that was okay, but not able to support myself. It was, I was numbing myself to get through the day and just try to do the best that I could for my kid.
Did you ever during this time, did you ever have anybody that was like, "Kate, there might be a problem," that tried to pour into you?
Yeah, honestly, our families, mine and his, they had front rows for, us destroying ourselves. And my parents and his parents, all of them tried to talk to us, but of course we're very stubborn people too. And when they would push hard, we just pulled back. So it got to the point where they would start curbing what they were saying too, because they wanted to make sure that they stayed in our lives. And it was a constant conversation. And I tried over and over. I can't even tell you all of the different things that I've tried, which if anyone's ever struggled with addiction, I'm probably have gone through some of them too. But modifying or telling myself only certain days or only certain amounts or with people, never at home. And you try to modify, you try to make it work and fix it. But I was kind of at that point where fixing it by myself really wasn't feasible. I was too far gone to be able to do it on my own. And I recognized that. And that was even more terrifying. So, it sent me the opposite direction. Instead of getting healthy, I just drank more to numb the fact that I knew that I was slowly killing myself.
Wow. So, going back a little bit, did you grow up in a church environment?
So I grew up Christian. My dad was saved, and when we moved to California with him, we started regularly attending church, and I loved it. The community, the environment in that church. I had great friends who all went through there. I learned about God and created my own relationship with God. The church had some issues that I didn't agree with at a time where I was moving out of the area, and my relationship with God always stayed, but it didn't stay revolved around a congregation going forward. So I maintained my relationship with him, but didn't have the fellowship of the other people. We didn't find a church that we really kind of felt home at when we moved after my mom's divorce. And it was just something that after a while, it was like, okay, I have my own relationship with God. I don't need to be in that building with other people. And, looking back now, I think that was kind of the first real step away that I took from my relationship with God, thinking that I'm still okay. I'm going to have my own relationship with God, but without having that fellowship of the building of the other people, having other people to go and, ask questions to, that was kind of like the really big separation between me and my relationship with God. And everything really fell apart kind of from there. And that's kind of, I feel like where the path that I started walking down really started.
Gotcha. What do you feel like was the tipping point where you're like, all right, I'm trying to fix this myself, moderation, only drinking with other people? How, yeah, can you share a
I
little bit there?
Yeah. So after my divorce, my daughter and I were living in an apartment together, and I was the fun house. I wanted her close. So I let, kids run through in and out. I was the place where everyone had snacks and games, and we did all of that. And it was one Saturday. It was a normal day, like any other day that it started off at. I had kids running through, Mary doing her thing. We had dinner. I bathed her. I French braided her hair, and I sent her to bed. We sing every night, even now at 11. We have our routine, and we did all of that. And I woke up Sunday morning completely dressed, shoes on, in my bed with absolutely no memory of the day before or if she was even in the house. Mary is my world. I say that I got sober for Mary until I could get sober for myself. And I was one of those people that wasn't sure I wanted kids. And it was a decision, a very conscious decision that I made when I decided to have my daughter. And I knew that I wasn't living up to what I had wanted to be as a mom and what she deserved. And when I had to go and find her and piece my day from the day before back together, it was a rude awakening that if I continued down this path, that I was going to lose my kid. And the alternative of her dad was horrifying to me. So it was like, it's time to figure this out, not just for yourself, but for this innocent child that is of you, of my blood. And I wasn't I wasn't doing what she deserved for her or for me. And that was kind of the tipping point for me where I really had to sit and look at myself in the mirror and be like, these days are just going to continue to happen and they're going to get worse. And, can you live with the fact that there could be a day where somebody takes this decision from your hands and takes your kid from you? So what are we going to do
Mm.
now to make sure that doesn't happen? And I called my mom and she came over. And while I'm sitting in my kitchen asking for help and telling her that I can't do this on my own, I'm still drinking and I couldn't stop. And
Mm.
I knew then that it wasn't a decision that I was going to be able to hold myself to and that I was going to need help doing that. And that was really the first step was telling her and admitting to her, even after all of the hundreds of conversations over the years prior that we'd had about modifying or my drinking isn't bad, that I finally admitted, you're right, I'm in trouble and I need help.
So before then, it was like, it's not as big a problem or I can fix it. Is that kind of what it was? And you were like, I need real help.
Yeah, I would have like a week or so where I'd do really well and then start to slide back down. Those ups, that's where my brain was staying was it's really not that bad. You can do this for a couple of days, but when you started kind of putting the years together, it was really eye-opening. And, I'd had moments where, I think all of us who overdrank have had a blackout moment, one night. It was starting to happen more and more often. And before, I wouldn't remember the after the bed. I'd put her to bed, keep drinking, and that would be the part of the evening that I wouldn't remember. But losing an entire day where I did the mom thing, I did everything that I was supposed to until I didn't. And it was like, how much of more of my life am I just a ghost in moving through doing what I think I need to be doing, but I'm not actually even present because I wasn't
Wow.
present that day.
Thank you for sharing. Another question. So, like the people at work or maybe your other friends that weren't as close to you, or did they know there was a problem, or were you able to hide it from others? Were you trying to hide it?
I very much was trying to hide it. I had a very big position. I was a property manager for several shopping centers and running these huge properties. And the people that were closest to me, they knew without knowing the nitty gritty. I like to say that I was 100% a functional drunk. I did it. I went to work. I did the things. It was okay for a long time, but it was kind of like at a 2, 3 year mark you start having people who saw the patterns. And that was kind of the way it was. Every couple of years I was moving or switching or doing something new because the notice was on me and it was kind of like, well, this isn't a one-off anymore, Kate. This is becoming a pattern. So when the spotlight was on me, it was time for me to go.
Wow. Looking back now, here's a question for you. Do you wish other people, let's see if it said you were stopped recording. It looks like you're back on again. I hope we'll see. So I'll cut that part out. So, Kate, can you hear me? All right. See if there's a refresh button. Can you click it to where?
There we go.
All right. Let's see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, I'll try and piece this together. We'll see what happens. So, question for you, Kate. Of course, this is not our plan, this recording session, but we'll make it work. So, Kate, looking back, do you wish there was other people that had stepped in and were like, Kate, let me help you? Do you wish more people had tried to intervene?
No, I had a lot of people who intervened, and it was not something that I was ready to hear. And I think that I had to be the one that came to this decision myself. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't drink. You can't make him drink. And that was kind of where I was. I had every person around me that was important to me, that I respected, that I loved, telling me, "Kate, this isn't right. There's something wrong here." And until I saw it, I don't think it would have made a difference. I think I could have had everybody and their mom coming out the woodwork, knocking on my door, being like, "Hey, this isn't okay." But until I was ready to see it, until I really, I think, was in the headspace to be able to handle it and turn the numbness off. And that was a lot of it. It was, I had to be ready to that point to actually be able to look at myself in the mirror in my life, because that's really what I was avoiding.
Wow. So, for what advice would you have for someone who has people in their life, friends or family, how they can best help someone just to be
I think
there
it's
or
Yeah, I think it's being there for the support. It's being there through the hard times and understanding that we all have to make this decision on our own. And I know that's hard. It was hard for my mom specifically, for my sister, to watch me go through this, to stand by me while I'm doing it. I think it's also important for people who are on the other side to note, keep your boundaries. Just because we're going through this doesn't mean that your boundaries have to be bridged because of us. I know my sister, there was a time in our relationship where I wasn't allowed to take my niece and my nephew anywhere, and that's devastating to me. She said what she needed to say and how she felt about what I was doing and the choices that I was making. And then she set a boundary for herself and her family with me. And I respected that. And to be honest with you, that right there was one of those tipping point things that I thought about when that morning when I'm staring at myself in the mirror with my makeup smeared across my face because I slept in it and I can't remember the entire day before, was not only now you don't remember an entire day that you were caring for your daughter, your sister doesn't trust you with, her children. You've got every important person in your life that's just like, what are you doing? I think if anybody had pushed, I probably would have pushed them away. And, my family, I think they did it in the best way that possible. They just were there. They were there when I needed to talk. They were there when I didn't want them to be. They just were there to support me in any way possible without compromising their own boundaries. And I think that's important too.
so after that day with your mom and you shared with her, can you kind of take us from that point?
Yeah, so I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do it on my own and that my mom and I were not equipped. We hadn't dealt with this. There was nobody in my family who was an alcoholic that needed help like I did. And I started with the doctor. She was a recovery specialist, and I will never forget it. I was in my office at work. It was a phone call. She gets on the phone and I tell her everything that I've been doing. And for the first time in a long time, I was 100% honest and I didn't fudge the amounts or how often. And I straight up told her me. And she told me I was going to die. And for the first time ever, I believed her. And it might not be 6 months, it might not be a year, it might not be 5 years. But if I continued down that path, that alcohol was going to take me from my daughter, that hit me harder than anything. I believed her. I was going to die. If I didn't make changes, I was going to die. And leaving that beautiful girl alone was not an option. So she pulled strings, said it was a miracle that it never happened. And I 100% know that it was God's plan that I was there. But I checked myself into a county program, closest to jail I ever want to be, Dave. I was the only one who self surrendered myself and wasn't put there by court. I detoxed there, probably some of the worst days of my entire life, in a dirty room with a plastic mattress with broken windows, by myself since I'm detoxing, just smoking a bunch of cigarettes and trying to reconcile with where I am and what I want for my life. And it was scary. And I realized after 7 days there, when they were about to put me back in with everybody else, that it wasn't a place that I was going to be able to heal, but that was exactly what I needed. And I
Mm.
called my mom and she picked me up, and I moved in with her for the 7 days that it took me to find a 30-day inpatient program, about an hour and a half from where I lived. And I went. And April 7th, 2021, I got sober.
Amen. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So, so what's it been like since then? Still struggle, still desire alcohol? You been have any relapses or what? What did it look like
No,
after then?
I'm very lucky that I quit before a lot of the what ifs happened. I didn't lose my license. I didn't get a DUI. I didn't get in trouble with the law. And I recognized that when I walked into the 30-day program, I was 7 days sober. And that's a unique position for a lot of people walking into rehab. I think everybody there couldn't believe that I was walking in sober. Everybody else was coming in, drunk and detoxing there. And I saw it differently coming into it that way. And I knew that I wiped my savings. I wiped a big chunk of my mom's for me to be there. Rehab's not cheap. And I took it as this is my chance. This is the opportunity and we're going to take it. And I've been very lucky. I'm told that I'm one of the 1% of people who don't relapse. The first year was a struggle. I went back to that same apartment that I was drinking in by myself and had to figure out a new way to live and survive and maintain my sobriety. And I did the meetings, still couldn't find a place that I totally fit and decided that, I was going to educate myself sober. And that's really what I did. I just became a sponge. I started with crafts, things to keep my hands busy. And I taught myself the Cricut and started creating everything and anything that I could possibly do. I started teaching myself digital marketing. Marketing had been a part of my career before I went into property management, and I'd always really loved it. With everything going on in our computer world, it was like, okay, let's learn this. So I just kind of kept myself moving every single day. And one thing that really kind of hit me when I was in rehab, we watched this video about advocacy for addicts. And I knew in that moment, God was screaming it in my head, recover out loud, loudly, so that others don't have to necessarily go down the same path that I did. And so that's what I tried to start doing, was just learn as much as I can to keep myself sober and then try to help others stay sober as well. And on my 1 year of sobriety, I wrote a book. I took all of the journalings and affirmations and the quotes that I had used to journal myself better. I put them in a book for others, and it's called Sober and Thriving, and it's 100 days of sobriety worksheets. And that was my first way of recovering loudly and trying to share, you know, what I've been through so that others don't have to go through the same thing.
Wow. Okay. Back to the book. What's the name of the book again?
It's called Sober and Thriving, 100 days of sobriety worksheets.
I assume, can people find this on Amazon?
They can. They can.
And the author's name is
Parker.
Kate Parker, Sober and Thriving.
Yes. It was everything that I used to keep myself sober. And a lot of that was really looking at myself, who I was, who I wanted to be, and who I was going to be in that messy middle. And I found myself. I found who I didn't want to be anymore that I was, and started every day moving in a direction that put me further and further from that girl who walked into that rehab struggling. My relationship with God got a lot stronger then too.
So, how old is your daughter now?
She's 11.
Does she know the story or?
Mary is my ride or die, and she was 4 or 5 when I left her dad, but we have a unique relationship because it's been just me and her, and she knows the story. I've been pretty honest with her about a lot of it because I don't want her to fall into those same traps that I do. Obviously, I sugarcoat it for an 11-year-old, but she knows my story. She knows all about my sobriety. We celebrate every year together with my family, and it's something that has been a conversation in our family that's really kind of changed the way that our family operates after me getting sober. I like to look at it that I influenced my family for the better.
That's awesome. It's so, man, it's great to hear that. So, how's your relationship with your mom?
Amazing. My mom's my best friend. I don't know what I would do without my mom.
What about your sister?
Again, I'm very fortunate. Like, I see family drama and things that go on in other people's families, and I'm just like, I don't understand that. My mom and my sister are my best friends. They're part of the reason we moved to Tennessee is we were, all kind of spread out, and we were spending our lives apart, and we really wanted to be together. And, my sister got her house first, and I picked the closest place that I could find to her. So I'm 6 minutes from her. And then my mom, part of the whole thing when she bought her house here was to be in this area. So now I'm 11 minutes from my mom. So, moving to Tennessee was such a great decision because I kind of got my family back, in my vicinity where I get them every day. I can drive across town right now in a couple of minutes to go see either one of them.
Amen. So, what words of advice or wisdom would you have for someone who's maybe in the middle of struggling with alcohol abuse?
I think it's surrendering. For me, that was a lot of what that was. It was surrendering that I can't control this anymore. I can't be the one who leads this because I'm not capable of getting myself out. So me realizing that I wasn't the one who was going to be able to fix this and knowing that I needed God back in my life. I needed to let the people in my life that cared about me and loved me help me. And just taking a look, at what you want for your life. That was a big one for me too. Looking at my life and where I'm at and where I want it to be. I don't know how many times the thoughts crossed my head when I was looking at myself in the mirror sometimes where it was like, well, when you're 6 and somebody asks you what you're going to be or for, what you want to be when you grow up, I definitely didn't think that it would be alcoholic. And it was something that I didn't want to look at for a long time. And that was a big part of the problem. But when I could actually look at myself in the mirror and say, yeah, you're an alcoholic, it's something you struggle with. And that doesn't make you a bad person. It just means you have something that you struggle with. It was easier to look at ways to get myself out of it.
Kate, did you ever feel like when you were maybe in the middle of what you were going through that you felt like there was no hope? Did you ever have that? You're like, man, there's just no hope.
Yeah. I think that once I made that decision, I was kind of on that path. But before I got sober, there were so many times where I would just sit there and be like, what am I doing? What's the point? There's no hope. There's no changing this. I'm stuck in this, marriage that I don't want to be in. I'm watching it affect my kid. And really, what can I do? I have so many memories of I had a lawn chair in our backyard where when things got really bad, that was where I would escape. And how many nights I just sat out there and felt hopeless and cried. And I felt very alone in those. And finding my way out of that really had to start turning it around, looking at me. It wasn't about everything else that was going on in my life. It was about what was going on inside of me that wasn't right, that was making everything else not right.
As I listen to your story, the one takeaway for me, I think can apply to everyone, whether you struggle with alcohol or not, whatever it might be, is the word that stuck out to me was surrender. You just have to surrender, give everything to God. I think ultimately I think maybe that's what God calls us to is complete surrender of our plans of what we want and how can we live for God. And so, yeah, I love that surrender.
Yeah. I've had to do it several times throughout this last 5-year journey of being sober. It's surrendering that, I can't do this on my own and that I need outside help. And more so, even just since we moved here to Tennessee, moving back here, with my dad too, we weren't as close, physically when he was there. And then he's been in, Tennessee for the last couple of years. But, moving back here and having my dad back into my life with his faith as well has been amazing for me. Having, another perspective and, somebody to talk about, with this and find my way back to my relationship with God. And I'm a control freak. I have white knuckled myself in my sobriety through a lot of this that living through survival mode when I don't have to be there anymore has been, a really hard one for me and tangling all of my worth up in my productivity. And, I started my business and I'm moving forward. But everything that everybody's telling me to do to be successful wasn't happening. And the only part of it that I wasn't doing was letting God into my life and letting him be his plan and not mine. I won't ever forget this one either. Here, a couple months after, I moved into my apartment and I felt like I'm working 12-hour days. I'm living on my computer. I'm doing every single solitary thing that everybody has told me to be successful, to launch this business, to do what I love to do and continue on this path. And my way wasn't working. And I had had a conversation with my dad the day prior, and words that he gave me just let me put it down. And I prayed and I cried and I fell to my knees in my living room and was like, okay, not my way anymore. My way's not working. So I fully turned that corner and let God 100% back into my life where it wasn't just, I have my relationship with God and that's great. And now I actually welcomed him back into my life. And that surrender, I think, was the most poignant. Today, I still struggle. I think we all do. We're all going to have those days this week, with things that I'm dealing with in the background. It's been rough. It's one of those weeks where thank God that I'm sober and that I have the tools to keep myself sober during these hard weeks. And I give that back to him. And the surrender that I did that day has given me the tools to keep moving, even when the days aren't perfect and they're not exactly the way that I would like them to be. And having that faith that not my plan, this is God's plan. And I'm going to have faith in him that he'd never let me fall. He's not going to start now. And then by letting him in and surrendering to him, the things in my life, I have a prayer journal. I can't even tell you in the last 2 weeks how many people have regurgitated words that I wrote down in my prayer journal during my prayers back to me. God is working in my life today in ways that I didn't even think were possible. He's opening doors to me for places and people that I never thought possible. And I I know, like, I've shared my story the last couple of weeks to a couple people, and I've made some great relationships from that. So the surrendering that I did when I moved here after banging my head against the wall for years trying to do it my way, that was the turning point for my life again. I have that the getting sober and then surrendering into God's plan for my life, and that's when my life I feel like is really starting over again.
Thanks so much for sharing. I think you said you had to surrender a few different times. And really, it's a daily surrender, right? Daily
Yeah.
surrendering to God.
Yeah.
His will be done. Our prayer is that God will use this story, your story, to encourage someone else that there is hope. It's surrender. So, Kate, if everyone that's listening to this, I'd like to ask, what's a prayer request you have so everyone that's listening to this podcast can lift you up in prayer? What's a prayer request you have, Kate?
Um, just support, being new to the community, the relationships that I'm building and, the people that I'm meeting. That's really what it is the prayer for me would be just keep putting me in front of people and in the rooms that allow me to help others.
Amen. Any final words, Kate, that you're like, man, I just got to share one more thing or
I think that, okay, so my final words, getting sober, being an alcoholic, being in recovery isn't something that's shameful. And that was one thing that I had to learn when I got sober. It's a obstacle. It's something that you're going to learn through and grow from. And if I were given the choice to go back and not be an alcoholic, I would choose it again. Knowing what I know now and where I'm at the end of my life is the trials and tribulations we got to go through. Life's hard, but it's what we learn and how we grow from them at the end that I think truly says who we are. So if you're struggling and you need help, it doesn't mean you're a bad person or that you're failing. It just means you need help and there's something that God wants you to grow through and learn from. And there's a lot of us out there who have gone through it and we're here to help support you. I'm here at any time. If anybody wants to ever grab a coffee and, sit and chat or pray together or just even sit in silence, I'm here for that. So I want to be a doorway to help people find the path that I'm finding now with God and my sobriety.
thanks for sharing, Kate. And then one last time, the name of your book.
It's called Sober and Thriving by Kate Parker, and it's on Amazon.
Amen. All right. Thanks so much. And
Thank you for having me.
you're welcome. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.